Yeah, thank you so much for this amazing introduction. And you've heard it, our panelists, about why every company needs a space strategy. And I'm sure many people here are interested in what's the business model implications, what can you do with it. But space has never really only been about business. There's always a sense of adventure, a sense of exploration. When you think about Star Trek, space, the final frontier, it's always about more than just business. And so I think also my panelists, my amazing group of panelists here, if they would only be in it for the business, they would probably have left the space long ago. So maybe starting with this, Sabine, what is your personal passion that makes you so excited about the sector and why you are still working in this space?
First of all, I have to admit that I never wanted to be an astronaut, even not when I was little. So my fascination for space really started when I started working. I came from the political sector, and space is at least a very interesting field for international politics. And once you enter the space branch, it won't let you go anymore. So what I'm really fascinated about today is the passion of our engineers working together with intelligent people all around me. They are really working on a daily basis and try to check if we can arrange us with the borders of physics. And of course, it is a very international branch. And the interesting thing is that when it comes to space, if it is industry, agencies, it is really like a family. So most of the guys from other branches often ask me, so if you talk about the Airbus guys, it always seems like if you're only partners, you are competitors. Yes, we are, but we still have the goal that we think that we need to convince the rest of the world that space is important. And that is something that is really, it's a really nice area to work in.
Super. And when we would do a show of hands in the audience about which companies in space they know, I'm sure SpaceX probably everybody knows. When we would go through the list of European companies, it would probably get a bit thinner. Huh? So how do you think about that? What's the role of Europe in space, and how can we compete with what we see from SpaceX?
So SpaceX is a very unique company. It is also, okay, if you ask, do you know any space companies in the United States? People might say Boeing, okay, but I think that Boeing is not really known for the space stuff, but obviously for the aviation stuff. So SpaceX is very unique. SpaceX did something that is new in the space branch. They created their own product, and they said, you can buy it if you're convinced that we have the best rocket. Yes, and unfortunately, it is the best rocket. On the other hand side, of course, we have a very good industry and a very good space branch in Europe. For example, our European satellite navigation system, Galileo, is much more precise than GPS, which is for us always very painful that everybody has, it's the same problem with Tempotaschentücher. If you talk about satellite navigation, everybody's always talking about GPS, but it's Galileo, which is quite better in Europe. And I think the other thing is that we are more infrastructure providers in Europe. And I think that's also why most of the people in the audience are not really aware of, because they are not our customers. Our customers are institutions and governments, and they know about the quality of the European space branch and the industry. The other question would be, so one of the other big, for example, European infrastructure programs is, for example, the Fehmarn Belt Channel, and I don't think that anybody is aware of who's building that. So for us, space, we see that space is becoming much more important. We have it in the media on a daily basis, and that is something that has been tremendously changed in the last 5 years, and we are on a very, very good path.
Good. Now, Eric, most probably are also not aware that, I guess, many will be using some of your products on an almost daily basis, given that you are one of the largest suppliers of data from space and of imagery. So maybe if we switch a bit to what other companies can do with it, what are some of the exciting applications that you see already today, and maybe also some of the industries that could do more with the data that you can already provide to them?
Yes, thanks, Jakob. Hi, everybody. yes, you might be surprised. What is Airbus doing in that field? Airbus is producing satellites, and yes, you mentioned that we are competitors, but we are also driving a lot of services. What does it mean? We operate our own satellites. Part of some satellites, we operate on behalf of certain customers their satellites and all their ground infrastructure. In mainly two fields, the field of Earth observation, we will come back to that in a second, and also the field of telecommunications, providing secure and reliable communication means, especially to government and armed forces. That is why Space Digital stands for within Airbus. Now data. Yes, you are using our products every day from space. Weather forecast. I think in the meantime, everybody in the audience knows that weather forecast is only working from space. But also, when you want to navigate, not making any advertisement, but Google Maps, Google Earth, where are the data coming from? Among others, from us. And we are very proud to be a founding partner of some Google services. Here you are using every day, without knowing, data from Airbus. Then coming to your question, we see not only satellite pictures being an important mean. In the 80s, 90s, when I discussed with my predecessors, they were all saying we were still having pictures with resolution of 2.5, 3 meters, printing them on special printers, providing them to the customers. Those times obviously are over. Now we are only dealing with pixels, and they are delivered to end customers through secure channels. But we have massive amount of data, and this massive amount of data, with the computer power we have nowadays, enables us to derive new applications. Give you one example, which is one of the challenge of our age, is global warming. What can we contribute with the climate change from space and from our services? I'll give you one example. Thanks to AI and some dedicated algorithm, we have developed an application that can follow deforestation. It's called Starlink with a J at the end, not confusing with the other one. And here we can see if we have had some deforestation in some area in an automatic way. We have developed that with an NGO, with some launch customers in the food and beverage industry. It was developed long ago, and now it gets a lot of traction. There will even be a new regulation in Europe that should enter into force next year that will make it obligatory for many industries to track that. It is also one of the contributions we do to manage this. And I could go on and go on. Take insurance. With all the natural disasters we have, then when you have an insurance, you see the pictures before, the picture after, in a very quick way. Disaster relief. Some of you have followed the horrible hurricane over the French island called Mayotte. We were able, very few hours after, to provide to the authorities satellite picture on the area. And not only satellite picture after the incident, but also before and after comparison. It's another example of things we can do. I could go forever, but you see space is in our everyday life. I strongly believe space is at the beginning. It's not a mature industry and it's not a mature business. It's growing fast, and I strongly believe each industry, each company needs an element of space in its strategy.
That was a perfect lead over to Raphael. Now, you as an investor, you are obviously looking at the cutting edge and what can we do in the future and what will be the applications maybe 20 years from now. So what have you seen as unlocks in the last years? What can we expect to come?
Yeah, and I want to make the arc from your first question, which is what actually drives us and inspires us, and then all the way to Eric, which is very tangible. And I think what drives many of us is this innate sense of exploration that humans have. I think this is really something, we can also see this in history, right? About 500 years ago, we had the exploration journeys of the Portuguese to discover new lands, but part of the reason for the exploration journeys was to find spice or cheaper ways to get very valuable spice. I think now we're doing the same thing with space. We're inspired by the exploration aspect, and that's really, really important. Ask yourselves, would you be as excited about SpaceX if they called themselves a satellite communications company, which they currently effectively are? Probably not. I stay up until 11:30 p.m. last night because Elon wants to go to Mars. And I want to go to Mars. But I strongly believe that on the way there, we will solve many of humanity's big problems. Energy, like we're invested in a nuclear fusion company, healthcare. Many of these problems we can solve by going to space because it brings out the best of us. It brings out, we're inspired, it motivates, it attracts the best people. This is another reason SpaceX is so good, because you can attract the best people with this vision of going to Mars. Okay, now coming back to your question, something tangible. So we're invested in satellite communication, remote sensing, more traditional space applications, and that's fine. I'm excited about our portfolio companies. But what is something that excites me for the next 10 years, for our next fund? It's in-space manufacturing. Because you may not know, but we can actually make better materials, like even, for example, semiconductors, or better biological materials, like protein-based drugs, human organ tissue, maybe all the way to personalized replacement organs. We can do that in orbit. We're not doing it right now, because it has been historically way too expensive, way too complicated. But this is the side effect of space becoming cheaper and cheaper, thanks to SpaceX and other people, and space becoming easier. And also people doing other things, like you may or may not know, there are several projects for future private space stations, in part to replace the International Space Station, which will be phased out in the 2030s. There's also many companies which are working on so-called free flyers, capsules. And both of these platforms can be used to do in-space manufacturing of advanced materials or biomaterials at scale. This has never been possible. It will become possible over the next few years. And this is my job as an early stage investor. I invest at the seed stage. This is when companies are very, very young, as you may know. So my job is to look 10 to 15 years out in the future and go where, as the Canadians say, where the puck is going to be, the ice hockey puck, not where it is right now. And where I see the puck going is a world where we have capacity for in-space manufacturing at economic costs, where people can produce some of these really exciting things at positive margins. This, I believe, we will be there in 5 to 10 years, and this is where I'm investing right now. And if you have an interesting idea in this space, talk to me. Also, if you're a corporate, if you're in the audience and you work for a pharma company or a semiconductor company, and this sounds new to you, you feel like you don't know enough about it, you should know about this. Come talk to me. I will spend time with you. I will explain why you need to care about space. Sorry, I'm rambling. I stop here. I get very passionate about this.
Yeah, I think everybody can feel the passion, right? That's exactly what I meant in the intro statement. Space has never been only about the business model or the money that you can make. It has always been about more. Now, if we look a bit at what are currently the big applications and also what are the applications that are getting a lot of attention maybe in the media, right? I think what we are also seeing is that, of course, with the conflict in Ukraine and the war in Ukraine, the use of satellite data, both for communication purposes, but also in imagery, in the defense sector, that maybe it was always there, right? But it was never so present in the public perception. So how would you think about that from a geopolitical point of view, and what's the importance in the future of having an own space infrastructure?
So first of all, what you need is a launcher. If you don't have access to space, you cannot do anything in space. And that's also why the launcher has always been the most important and politically most centric discussions that we had in space. So we are very, very happy that Europeans' independent access to space, that we have that back now with Ariane 6. We have here in Bavaria very promising companies that are building their own micro launchers, so small rockets. Keep my fingers crossed that at least two out of three of them will have their first orbital launch this year. So that's also why SpaceX is from my point of view in the center of the discussion, because not only with Falcon 9, the first reusable rocket, but also with Starship and the capacity that Starship will bring and give the space launch to bring stuff to space and bring stuff back from space, will totally change what we can do in space, because that is at the moment, of course, also building a satellite is not something that has been done very cheaply, but the most expensive thing and the bottleneck is access to space. In the future, so what we already have is as you mentioned, for military purpose, Earth observation reconnaissance. We have satellite communications. Of course, we have also what we call PNT, position and navigation and timing. So this is classical how GPS and Galileo works. The future of that will be a combination of all those applications in bigger constellations. So right now it is separate programs, and especially in the German armed forces, it is what we know from the Planungsprozess. It is not an evolutionary system, but it is, okay, we have to finish that program and then we start a new one. But in space applications or satellites, they have a different times of degradation. So if you have low Earth orbit satellites, they might not, maybe they have to be replaced after 5 years. And if you go, so this is why we should try to think more in constellations, and especially if we think about Starlink. So Starlink is, on the one hand side, very fast growing, because the guy who's building it has an own launcher, makes it easier to bring the stuff up. But also because to the latency from the low Earth orbit, we have a better communication system than we have in the past or right now with geostationary satellites. And therefore, I think the future will be big constellations. They provide with satellites telecommunication, Earth observation data, PNT. You can combine that. Maybe you have a satellite that has different application instruments carrying. And then you can also, in the next step, if you connect them with lasers, then at least you have you might have in the future a system that provides everything that you have on a terrestrial basis as a backup in space. And I think this is something that is not only important for the armed forces, but everyone else is doing it. And sometimes it's just important to be in the same area and to do the same stuff that other guys do. That's also why being able to go back to space again from Europe is, as I told you, without a launcher, you cannot do anything in space. And that's also why only if you have the launcher, you are invited to the big boys table. And that's where we are now going back there. And we have to make sure that everything that we do in space is not only from what do we really need, but what has to be done to make clear that Europe and what we are standing for in Europe is also present in space. So, for example, going back to the moon, I don't think that it is a good idea to leave the moon only for the Chinese and the Russians. Of course, the West has to go back to the moon. And that is something that I think is also a little bit changing, that it's not only for applications that is geopolitically relevant, but also where are we, what are we doing there, and how long do we stay there?
And as a last point, as unfortunately we have to end this exciting panel, but maybe as a last point of inspiration, just one number from each of my co-panelists. When do you think will we have the first human on Mars?
On Elon time or on regular time? I'm joking. So as people may know, the window to go to Mars is open every 26 months. This is when the planets are in close alignment. When you're on the other side of the sun, obviously this doesn't work. I think SpaceX is on track, despite what happened yesterday, to launch uncrewed spacecraft. There's people in the audience who would know better. For the next window. And then if that goes well, then I think either the window after that or the window after that, so early 2030s.
Early 2030s.
Putting myself out there.
30s or 40s?
I'm not so optimistic. I bet on 2042 for really someone on Mars.
Okay.
2042.
You have the last word?
2030.
Okay. So we will see. Huh?
We'll see.
Then you will all be able to go to Mars at some point. Thank you so much.
Thank you.